I wasn't supposed to be the one who ended up with the cabin. Everyone knew that. My brother knew it, my parents knew it. And honestly, for a long time, I think even I felt guilty about it. But Grandpa Joe left it to me, in writing. Notarized, filed with the county clerk in Harlan County, Kentucky. And that piece of paper was the only thing standing between me and losing the only place I'd ever felt like myself. My name is Callie. I'm 31 years old. And I grew up in a house where love was always conditional on something. Your grades, your choices, who you married, how much money you made. My older brother, Ryan, was the golden one. Football scholarship, business degree, the whole thing. Me, I left for art school in Cincinnati at 18, came back at 25 with student debt and a freelance design portfolio that actually paid my bills, and somehow that was still never enough for my parents to look at me the way they looked at him. Grandpa Joe's cabin was up in the hills, about 40 minutes outside of Harlan. 3 bedrooms, a wood stove, a creek that ran along the back property line. He'd built most of it himself in the 1970s. I used to spend summers there as a kid while my parents worked. He taught me to fish. He taught me to read a storm by the color of the sky. He told me once, when I was maybe 9 years old, that I had good bones, and I didn't know if he meant me or the cabin. But either way, it stuck with me my whole life. He passed in March 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer. It moved fast. He was gone in 6 weeks from diagnosis. I was there at the end. Ryan wasn't. He said he had a conference he couldn't miss. I don't know if that's true. I never asked. The will reading was at an attorney's office in Harlan on a Tuesday morning. I drove 3 hours from Cincinnati. My parents drove up from Lexington. Ryan called in by phone. The attorney, a quiet older man named Gerald Hatch, read through the document in that careful, deliberate way attorneys do when they know the room is going to react. The cabin and the 2 acres it sat on went to me. Ryan's share was the savings account, about $40,000. My parents received the rest of his personal property. It wasn't nothing, but Ryan had been telling people for years that he was going to inherit the cabin. He'd talked about turning it into a short-term rental. He talked about it at Christmas dinners like it was already decided. Like Grandpa Joe hadn't been sitting right there listening. I found out later that Grandpa Joe had actually changed the will about 8 months before he died. He didn't tell me. He didn't tell anyone. Gerald Hatch said he'd come in alone, updated the document, and left. Grandpa Joe never explained it to me, but I like to think I know why. I was the one who came. I was the one who sat with him through the bad nights. Anyway, Ryan didn't say anything on the phone call. Just got quiet. My mother made a sound I still can't describe, somewhere between a sigh and something harder than that. My dad looked at the table. I drove back to Cincinnati thinking it was over, that people would be upset, that feelings would need time, but that eventually everyone would move on, because what else do you do? The will was legal. It was filed. It was done. I was wrong about that. The calls started within the week. My mother first, then my dad, and Ryan calling my mom's phone because I'd stopped picking up for him directly. The line was always the same. Grandpa Joe must not have been thinking clearly. He must have been confused. Wouldn't I consider being fair to the family? Didn't I know how much that cabin meant to Ryan's future? I want to be honest here, I wavered. I grew up in that family. I spent 30 years being told that keeping the peace was the same as being good. There were nights I almost called Ryan back and told him we could work something out. Not because I wanted to, but because the guilt was loud and I was tired. What stopped me was one specific conversation with my mother, about 3 months after the will reading. She called me on a Sunday afternoon. She said, and I'm going to remember these words for the rest of my life. She said, Callie, you've always been selfish. You left this family, you took everything Daddy gave you, and now you're holding on to a piece of property out of spite. Ryan has a family, he has children. What do you have? I didn't answer that question. I just said, I'll talk to you later, Mom. And I hung up. I sat in my apartment for about an hour after that. And somewhere in that hour something shifted in me. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. Like a fog I'd been living in for 3 decades finally started to lift. I contacted Gerald Hatch the next week. I asked him what I needed to do to formally document my ownership and make sure everything was airtight. He filed the deed transfer to my name with the county, which technically should have already been done, but there had been some delay. I got title insurance. I made sure every piece of paper was exactly where it needed to be. Then I made another decision. I was going to renovate the cabin. Not flip it, live in it. I'd been freelancing in Cincinnati for 6 years, and at that point I could work from anywhere with a decent internet connection. The cabin had old wiring and a bathroom that needed a full gut renovation, but the structure itself was sound. Good bones, like Grandpa Joe said. I put my Cincinnati apartment on notice and started planning the move for late September. I told my parents in August. My mother cried. Not sad crying, sharp crying, the kind that's really anger wearing a different coat. My dad said I was making a mistake. Ryan texted me, "You're doing this to hurt us. You know that, right?" I didn't respond. I moved in on a Thursday. My friend Jessie helped me drive the U-Haul. We got there around 4 in the afternoon, the sun coming through the tree line in that particular September way that makes everything look like it's on fire in the best possible sense. I stood on the porch for a minute before we started unloading and I let myself feel it. I was home. For the first time in my adult life, I was somewhere that was mine, and I was home. The first month was hard in the logistical ways. The wiring project took longer than estimated. I was running on a mobile hotspot for internet until the provider could run a line out to the property. The wood stove needed a new flue liner before I could safely use it heading into winter. But I loved all of it. I loved the problems. I loved that the problems were mine to solve on a property that was mine. I talked to my parents maybe twice in that first month. Surface level stuff. I was trying to leave a door open without inviting anyone to walk through it and rearrange my furniture. The call that changed everything came on a Saturday night in late October. My mother. She sounded different, softer. Which should have been my first warning. She said she was worried about me being out there alone as winter came in. She said she and my dad wanted to come for a weekend, see the place, clear the air. She said Ryan and his wife and the kids might come too. And wouldn't it be nice, a family weekend like when we were young? I said I'd think about it. I know. I've replayed this so many times. I called Jessie that night and she said, "Callie, don't." She said it exactly like that, just don't. But I thought, they're my parents. I thought maybe my mother's tone meant something real. I thought I can host one weekend, and it doesn't mean anything has changed. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. They arrived on a Friday afternoon in early November. My parents, Ryan and his wife Amber, their 2 kids, my dad hugged me. My mother looked around the cabin the way a person looks at something they're trying to figure out how to take apart. Ryan didn't hug me. He shook my hand like I was someone he'd just met at a work event. The first evening was fine, surface level fine. I made chili. My dad played with the kids by the creek until it got dark. My mother and Amber washed dishes together and talked in low voices I wasn't part of. Ryan sat at the kitchen table and made a point of looking at everything, the new fixtures, the refinished floors, the work I'd had done on the back porch, with this expression I couldn't read. The conversation happened Saturday after lunch. The kids were napping. My dad brought it up, which surprised me because usually my mother is the one who opens these things. He said Ryan had been talking to a property attorney. He said there was a question about whether Grandpa Joe had been of sound mind when he updated the will. He said they weren't threatening anything. They just wanted me to understand that this was complicated, and wouldn't I rather resolve it as a family than go through something legal and painful. I put my coffee cup down on the table. I said Grandpa Joe was of sound mind. Gerald Hatch would not have let him sign anything otherwise. And I have the deed. I have title insurance. I have everything filed correctly. My dad said, "Callie, I said, "No, we're not doing this. I'm not negotiating the terms of something that was already decided by someone who had every legal right to decide it." Ryan said from across the room, "You were always his favorite. You know that? You worked that angle your whole life." And I looked at him, my brother, who I had known since I was 4 years old, and I said, "Get out of my house." My mother started crying, the sharp kind again. My dad said, "Let's all calm down." Amber took the kids outside. Ryan didn't move for a long moment. Then he did. They were packed and gone within the hour. All of them. My parents too, because apparently there was no version of this where they were going to stay and take my side. My mother on her way out the door said, "You're going to regret this." I stood on the porch and watched the 2 cars go down the gravel drive and disappear through the tree line. The sun was already low. It was cold. I could see my breath. I went inside. I sat down on the floor in front of the wood stove, which was burning well by then because I'd fixed the flue, and I just stayed there for a while. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in the middle of a field after something had passed through it. Quiet in a way that's not peaceful, just empty. I called Jessie. She answered on the second ring. I said, "They're gone." She said, "Are you okay?" I said I didn't know yet. The weeks after that were strange. My parents didn't call. Ryan definitely didn't call. I worked. I finished the bathroom renovation. I did most of the tile work myself, watching YouTube tutorials at 10 o'clock at night with a beer and a bag of grout. The creek froze along the edges in December, and I took a photo of it and almost sent it to my mother before I put my phone down. I heard from my cousin Teresa in January. She texted to say she'd heard things had gotten bad and was I okay? I said I was fine. She said Ryan had been telling the extended family that I had taken advantage of Grandpa Joe in his final months, that I had manipulated an elderly man who was on heavy medication. I sat with that for a few days. Then I contacted Gerald Hatch again. I asked him purely as a matter of record whether there was any documentation of Grandpa Joe's cognitive state at the time he updated his will. Gerald said that yes, in fact because of Grandpa Joe's illness and the significance of the change he was making, Gerald had taken extra steps at the time. He had a note from Grandpa Joe's treating physician confirming his mental capacity, and the signing had been witnessed by 2 people unrelated to the family. Gerald said he'd prepared for exactly this kind of challenge. He said Grandpa Joe had actually asked him to. Grandpa Joe had known. He'd known this might happen, and he protected me before he died, and he'd never said a word about it to me. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of Gerald's office and cried for about 20 minutes, not sad crying. The other kind. I sent Ryan a certified letter, not threatening, informational. I outlined the documentation that existed, named Gerald Hatch and his office, referenced the physician's note and the witnesses. I said I had no interest in litigation, but that I wanted him to know that any legal challenge would encounter a very thoroughly documented record. I said I was not going to respond to family narratives that characterized my grandfather's final decisions as anything other than exactly what they were, clear, legal, and intentional. I sent a copy to my parents. My mother called 3 days later. She didn't apologize exactly, but she said she'd talked to Teresa, and Teresa had told her what Gerald Hatch's assistant had apparently confirmed when Teresa called the office. My mother said I didn't know all of that. I said, I know. She said, your grandfather really did all that. I said, he really did. We talked for about 20 minutes. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a movie moment. But it was real, and it was ours, and it was a start. Ryan didn't call. He still hasn't. I don't know if he will. I've made peace with the possibility that he won't. It's March now. 2 years since Grandpa Joe passed. The creek is running again, and the red buds are starting to come in along the hill. I've been working from the back porch when the weather allows, which is most afternoons lately. I have a good internet connection now, real one, and enough clients that I'm actually turning some work down, which is something I never thought I'd be able to say. I'm not going to pretend the last 2 years were easy or that family stuff is ever really over. It isn't. My dad came out to visit by himself last month, just for a day, and we walked the property line together, and he didn't say much. At one point he stopped and looked out at the ridge and he said, "Your grandfather was a smart man." And I said, "Yeah, he really was." That's all he said. That's all I needed. This cabin is mine. Not because I fought for it, though I did. Not because I was Grandpa Joe's favorite, though maybe I was. But because one old man, who built something with his own hands, decided that I was the right person to take care of it. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure he wasn't wrong. If you're somewhere in the middle of something like this, someone telling you that wanting what's yours is the same as being selfish. Someone making you feel like keeping the peace is the same as being fair. I just want you to know that the moment you stop apologizing for existing is not the moment you become the bad guy. It's the moment you finally stop being one. I'll see you next time. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that cabin on that November afternoon. Not the argument itself. I've replayed that enough. I mean, what was underneath it. What had been building for years before anyone said the word out loud. Ryan didn't show up that weekend because he wanted the cabin. He showed up because he had never once in his life been told no by anyone in our family, and he didn't know what to do with it. My parents didn't back him because they thought he was right. They backed him because backing him was the path of least resistance, and they had been choosing that path for 30 years. None of it was personal in the way betrayal usually feels personal. It was just a pattern. A long, slow pattern of who gets protected and who gets asked to be understanding. What I've come to believe is that people telegraph who they are long before the moment of crisis. Ryan telegraphed it at the will reading when he went quiet instead of saying congratulations. My mother telegraphed it when she said, "What do you have?" Like a life without children was a life without standing. My dad telegraphed it every time he let things go because intervening felt too hard. I just wasn't reading clearly until the stakes got high enough that I had no choice. And here's the thing about Grandpa Joe that I keep coming back to. He didn't protect me in that will because he loved me more. I actually don't think it was about love at all, not in the simple way. He protected me because he paid attention. He watched for decades and he saw who showed up and who didn't, who called and who was too busy, who sat with him through the hard nights and who had a conference they couldn't miss. He drew a conclusion based on evidence and then he acted on it and then he quietly made sure his conclusion was bulletproof. That's not favoritism. That's a man who understood that intentions don't count for much and actions are the only real currency there is. I think about that a lot when I'm tempted to feel guilty about any of this. About the fact that I have the cabin and Ryan doesn't. The guilt still shows up sometimes because I was trained for it. But then I think about Grandpa Joe driving alone to Gerald Hatch's office, asking for a physician's note, requesting 2 unrelated witnesses, building a paper record to protect the decision he'd made with total clarity. And I think he knew what he was doing. The least I can do is trust that. The hardest part of this whole thing wasn't the argument or the certified letter or the months of silence. The hardest part was learning that loving your family and holding your ground are not opposites. That you can want things to be different and still not move. That staying is not the same as agreeing. I spent most of my life confusing those things, and I think a lot of people do. Callie didn't win because she was clever or because she fought hard enough. She won because she showed up for years in small ways that didn't feel like strategy at the time. That's the only thing that actually holds. Not the argument you win in the room, the record you build over a lifetime, one ordinary day at a time. If you're holding something that's yours, an inheritance, a boundary, a version of yourself you worked hard to become, and someone is telling you that keeping it makes you selfish, I want you to hear this. The person calling you selfish is usually the person who wanted you to hand it over. Those are not the same as the truth.